Hello and welcome to Lexitecture, a podcast about word origins and histories. My name is Ryan, and in each episode my friend Amy and I present a new word to each other and you, delving into its past, uncovering its secrets, and discovering that even the most basic, unassuming word can offer up precious truth nuggets of wordy trivia gold. If that sounds like the show for you, it probably is, so tell your friends and come along for the ride. Today's episode, Brazen Measles Break. How are you, Mignon? It's been a while. It was lovely to meet you down in Boston. And how are things?
Agreed. Yes, I'm well, and that was such a fun conference. It was kind of small and academic, and it just we got some. I don't know. It felt like we got some time to know each other.
Yeah, it was really good. I had just a lovely time. I kind of wanted to stay in the bubble of that place, which probably only really existed for that weekend, but I did want to live there a bit.
Yeah, it was so beautiful and just learning something exciting new every minute. It was great.
Yeah. Everyone was smart. Everyone.
Yes, let's live there.
Just stay there. I guess we'll just jump into this now. So I'll just do a little spiel to get everyone caught up. So our guest today, our super special, incredibly exciting guest is Mignon Fogarty, known to the world as Grammar Girl, and I doubt there's a lot of people out there who are listening to us who haven't become familiar with your work, Mignon, but if you are not, somehow look her up, Grammar Girl. She's everywhere and has done everything and is the consummate professional, and we were lucky enough to appear on a language podcasters panel at the Sound Education Conference in Boston last November with Mignon and along with several other esteemed podcasters. So that's where we all eventually knew each other and how this all got set up. So welcome to Lexitecture, Mignon Fogarty. Yay!
Thank you so much. Yay! It was so great to meet you, and I'm glad to be here on your podcast.
That's fantastic.
Please don't be too consummately professional. I don't know about you, Ryan, but I am sitting in my spare bedroom, almost underneath a piece of furniture, with my with my setup around about me. Yeah. And Ryan has sent me several messages today just to check that I am still the right person in the right time zone on the right computer. So.
Well, we're dealing with 3 different time zones, so I'm amazed that we all showed up on time. Often dealing with 2 time zones, someone's late or an hour early or an hour late. So I think we did great.
Ryan, your organizational skills are top notch, as always.
That's literally
Indeed.
The first time anyone's ever said that, but thank you very much. I appreciate that. In your face, all of my elementary school teachers. So I guess we'll just dive right in. Mignon, would you like to take it away? I mean, in the tradition of guests first.
Sure. So I grew up in Washington State, and there's a measles outbreak going on there right now. Oh. And I don't live there now, but because I have family there still, I'm especially aware of it. Mm-hmm. And I have to travel soon, so I have been kind of worried and finally decided to look up how contagious is measles anyway, and do I need a booster shot right before I get on a plane? And so it turns out adults, if you got vaccinated as a child, you don't need booster shots, so that was a big relief. But it is wildly contagious. So the CDC says that if you are in a room with someone who has measles and you have not been vaccinated, you have a 90% chance of getting measles.
Whoa.
So that is one of the most contagious things I've ever heard of. So, yeah. But then, then I started thinking, well, measles, what does that mean? And I remember a while ago I did a show on malodorous.
Ooh, nice.
And words that had bad smells. And I briefly went on a little tangent there about the mal prefix. Mm-hmm. And one of the words that surprised me was malaise, which means bad ease, and malaria, which means bad air. I had no idea. Wow. Bad air, malaria. So
the bad air disease. That's perfect.
Isn't that amazing? So, from that I thought, well, malaria had a really interesting origin, so maybe the measles has a really interesting origin too. And it turned out it did, and it put me on a path to some other interesting things too. So, me, as words always do, right? It's so fun.
Yeah.
So measles is the plural of the Middle English measle, which means little spot.
Oh.
So you get measles and you get little spots. So that makes sense.
That's fantastic.
And it comes from measle, Middle English, which means a leprous or a leper or leprosy. But then you go to Old French, measle, and directly from medieval Latin, this is all from Etymology Online, mycellus, which means a wretch. It was a noun and an adjective meaning wretched. And so from measles, when you're so sick, I suppose you're wretched. And miserable. And it turns out that miserable has the same root as measles.
Oh.
Okay, that's awesome.
I thought that was amazing. And then you go through and it's like misery has the same root, and miser has the same root, because a miser, before, it was someone who was unhappy because they hoarded money, was just a miserable wretch. So miser and measles have the same origin, and I thought that was pretty amazing. And
That
of
is
course,
so cool.
miserable. Yeah, and then the other interesting word in the measles family is measly. So if you say, well, that's a measly portion of oatmeal or something like that, now it means small or inadequate, but it originally described someone who had measles. Someone who had measles was measly.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Right? And then I'm not entirely sure of the connection, but it seems like it meant, if you had the measles, then, you couldn't work, and it came to mean good for nothing. So,
Okay.
And then that's how it gave us the sort of inadequate meaning that it now has. So I just love those leaps through meanings. It always makes sense when you go one step along the way, even though the beginning and the end, you look at them together and go, why would those be related?
Yeah, indeed.
Absolutely.
I like the very sort of simplistic, egalitarian approach to naming diseases. There's nothing fancy going on when you're ill. You simply say what the thing is that is making you ill and miserable. If it's a little spot, that's the one. If it's bad air, that's the thing.
Right. And then I started thinking about other diseases, and I started thinking about influenza, and that turned out to be really interesting too. So it ultimately goes back, well, we got it from Italian, which meant influence. And it comes because people thought you got sick from the influence of the stars.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's beyond amazing.
Isn't it?
I'm sorry, I can't come to work. I have the stars.
Yeah.
Right. It's the star. The stars made me sick, and so back in medieval times, that's what people thought, that the stars controlled everything and they made you sick. So so it was used to describe lots of illnesses. It was sort of a generic term that meant sort of influence of this, influence of that, illness of this. So you talk about like the influenza of scarlet fever, for example.
Oh, wow.
And then somewhere along the way, when it came into English, it just got shortened to influence and then influenza. And I think it was like one particular outbreak that, let's see, here it is from where is it? There was one particular outbreak. The influenza di Catarro, Qatar epidemic in 1743 that spread throughout Europe. Again, this is from Word Detective, and that was the one that led everyone to just call things influenza and then the flu. So it went from the influence of our stars to one particular outbreak to now we just call like one specific disease the flu.
That's amazing. I like the idea that one of the things that we kind of come back to from time to time is just how much you can kind of infer, if not, academically learn about what was going on in the various parts of the world at the various points in history based on how the words made their sort of transmogrifications. So,
I remember Kevin talking about that at Sound Education.
Yeah, and like the idea that, like for instance, you can, you can strongly infer the influence of the stars, pardon the pun, from the fact that they got it, that gave them the name. And like when leprosy sort of came up to the surface in your exploration of measles, like just this almost legendarily only real malady that for centuries and millennia people knew about, and that kind of establishes this sort of baseline way of talking about being sick. And then you get a little more specific with, well, they're miserable because they have these little spots, and just the way that all ties together and what the touchstones for people's understanding was at various points in history is really interesting to learn.
On you go, Mignon.
Oh, no, I was just going to agree and say, I love how it reflects how people thought about biology and illness at the time. A long time ago, I was a biologist. Before I was grammar girl, I was a biologist and then a science writer and then became grammar girl. So, I think it's fascinating to look at historically why people thought we got sick, or, how people thought emotions came from the blood or things like that. And that's reflected in our language still today. We just don't always realize it.
I love the fact that influenza was once a sort of a generic term, and it's almost come full circle because people love to claim that they have the flu these days. And generally speaking, they go to the doctor and the doctor says, yeah, you don't have the flu. You have a bad cold. And people are like, no, I have the flu, because the flu is so much worse than having the cold, and it's so much, I don't know, it's almost like out impressing the other diseases. But by saying, no, not just a cold, the actual flu. When in fact it was just, star sickness, influence, could cover kind of anything at all.
Yeah, and one of my sources said that it's relatively common for words that come into English to be sort of the generic first part of a foreign phrase like that. And I know I've seen examples, but I couldn't think of any examples. And it turns out it's kind of a hard thing to research. But, influenza, the influenza of the scarlet fever, and then we just get that first part, influenza, that carries a meaning over into English when we take the whole phrase from a foreign language and then truncate it. So I don't know. Maybe a listener will know of an example they could share.
Isn't it amazing how empty your brain can become when someone asks you to think of an example of something?
Absolutely.
And I feel like if you're the person who came up with the definition, you are even more likely to have the empty brain when someone says, oh, can you give me an example of that?
Right. Actually, I have a question for you because you live in Scotland. You are Scottish, correct?
I am, yes.
And so I was looking at mumps, which turned out not to be all that interesting, but it did say that it was first a verb, to mump, and that it's currently chiefly Scottish. And I was wondering if you had ever heard that, had heard to mump used as a verb.
That's interesting. To mump and moan, and almost exclusively used in conjunction with mumping and moaning. Oh. That's certainly a phrase that I would use. And if you're mumping and moaning, then you're just, you're generally bitching and complaining and having a bit of a moan. But it would be odd to hear that word by itself. It's certainly not, mump and moan isn't something that I would have thought was particularly Scottish. I don't know. I'm trying to think of an example. I know that I use it and I would hear people using it. I have that sense sometimes with Scots words that I don't know that they're specific to where I live because I live here.
Right.
Like,
yeah, no, I've never heard it. Have you heard it, Ryan?
I hadn't heard that before. I feel like that might have... I feel like I've heard this come up as a thing that Amy has talked about, whether you've just used it, whether I've heard you use mumping and moaning.
Oh, maybe.
In a conversation.
I had no idea that to mump and to moan was related to the disease, the mumps. It's such a pleasing word to say, isn't it?
It is a fantastic word.
There's really delicious about the word mumps.
There is, the OED compared it to other words like it, like murmur. I don't think they're etymologically related, but it was sort of the same class of words that has sort of a sound that is not onomatopoeia, but sort of representative of something.
Yeah.
And mump does, it does come from to grimace. Okay. So, it makes sense that if you're bitching and moaning, you're sort of making maybe a grimacing face. So it does make sense. But I love it though. So I want to use that now.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Well, we did, Ryan, we have talked about a mumpsimus fairly recently.
That's what it was.
And if I recall correctly, a mumpsimus is someone who deliberately sticks to a phrase or a usage that they know is incorrect, even when they know it's incorrect, just through sheer stubbornness.
That's what it was. I like, yeah, okay. That, yes,
So
that's
my
ticking a
husband,
lot of
for
bells.
example, because he knows that it annoys me, and because it's a sort of a little funny in-joke within the word, he loves to say pronunciation instead of pronunciation.
Oh, right.
So, yeah, he has a mumpsimus going on with pronunciation.
Ah,
That's
Yeah.
delightful. Very
that's
cool.
cold.
Well, that was
Very
that's
cool.
an awesome journey, and far from a measly one. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Full
I
circle
must point
wholeness.
out, I must point out that I have been to the last leper colony in Europe.
Oh my gosh.
It's
Wow.
a very interesting trip. If you ever visit the island of Crete, which is well worth a visit because, amongst other things, it contains the ruins of the Cretan city of Knossos, which was part of the Minoan Empire.
Right.
And basically, if you like history and if you like ancient history, you get to wander around the National Museum in Crete going 5,000 years BC. What? And like all the time, everything is more than 1,000,000 years old. But Crete is very, very beautiful, and there's a small island off the coast of Crete called Spinalonga, which means I think it's a long needle-like island, and up until I believe the 30s, people were sent to Spinalonga when they started to show signs of leprosy.
Wow.
And they were cut off from their lives, their families, their homes, everything else that had been their life, and they were sent to live on this island which had this community of lepers. And of course, the great irony of leper colonies is that leprosy isn't contagious, unlike measles.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, so
I didn't know that.
well, people would see these horrendously deformed people with the disease because it has such a dramatic and obvious effect on people, and so they would say, well, you have to go away, we don't want that disease. And it wasn't until much later that it was discovered that it's not actually a contagious disease at all. So
Wow.
yeah, it was a really interesting place to visit. And Crete is it's pretty glorious. If you ever get the chance, go along, and definitely take the boat tour to go and see Spinalonga.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. Amy? So you want to take it away, or you want to follow up, or you want me to go?
I went first last time.
You went first last time. Okay, so I'll go first this time. First as in second. Whatever. Whichever number you order.
Yeah, let's not fight.
The second
So-
first.
If that's right. So, contrary to my tremulous beginning, the word I've chosen today is brazen. And
Oh,
so brazen
sorry.
meaning bold or shameless or impertinent, that kind of thing is sort of how it's used now. It's an adjective. I always assumed that it was related to a brazier, like a metal dish for holding coals to keep warm, back in the day. That comes from the French word for embers. Traces back to the Proto-Indo-European root meaning to boil, bubble, effervesce, or burn. However, nothing to do with brazen. So get that out of the way right now. That would just be pure folk etymology, and as though we love it, we're going to put that aside for now. Where brazen comes from is directly from the Old English brazen, just meaning made of brass. And brass was braze, B-R-A-E-S, is how it's sort of transliterated in modern English. So brazen simply means made of brass. It goes back to as early as sort of 1000, around the turn of the second millennium, and simply meant that. It was a really common, just anything made of brass was brazen, these brazen tools, these brazen weapons, whatever. By the sort of late 1300s, it started being used metaphorically to refer to something that had sort of the strength of brass. So it didn't have to be the material science usage of it. It could just be his brazen wit, or was describing the hero. The brazen hero just meant strong as brass, untouchable, that kind of thing, hard to damage. And that continued on in that route all the way into the 1500s. And it's not until 1573 is the first OED attestation of it meaning kind of the modern meaning. Although I love the way the OED words it so much that I have to just quote the OED's definition of it, which is hardened in effrontery or shameless.
That's great.
And I love everything about that. Hardened in effrontery. And so 1573, yeah, that's when it started meaning what we kind of now think of as the adjective brazen. And so that was a relatively straightforward route to get back to brass, which made me think, well, where does brass come from? That's kind of an interesting word. And it is an interesting word.
I'm interested in the fact that I suppose I didn't expect brass to be such an old thing.
Well, yeah, and it hold on to that thought because this gets better.
Okay,
so,
cool. Take it away.
Brass, the OED entry for brass, as well as the Etim Online entry for it, has those words that we always love to hear / hate to hear, which is of obscure origin or of unknown origin.
Wonderful.
It is, but again, like what we ran into with dog, it's sort of profoundly unknown. Like it has no cognates. It has no earlier root than Old English. It is unrelated to, not traceable directly to any other similar word in either Germanic languages or Northern European languages or Anglo-Saxon or Latin or Greek or anything else. It's just there. It just popped into being, fully formed as brass. There's been comparisons to an old Swedish word, brasa. I don't know how to pronounce Old Swedish, but brasa, meaning fire, or the Danish word meaning to roast, brase. But those are always just comparisons. Like there's no actual tracing to go from one to the other. So it's just this island in itself in Old English, popped into being for who knows what reason. But at the time, and for centuries, it referred to either the metal we call brass now, which is the alloy of copper and zinc, or the metal that we now call bronze, which is the alloy of copper and tin. So the idea that, which struck me as really interesting because, of course, you're used to hearing the Bronze Age. And so bronze, to me, has this really deep, rich history reaching far back into antiquity. You think of the Romans, you think of these other vying civilizations in the Bronze Age. But in fact, bronze as an English word was developed once copper and zinc became the predominant alloy in Britain. It took over the word brass, and so they came up with the word bronze, and that became popularized to talk about the copper and tin alloy. But before that, there was no differentiation.
Before they had that word?
They just brass referred to both of them. Brass referred basically to any copper-based alloy. Which
that's amazing.
Yeah, and to me, and I guess this is one of those, like, you run into your subconscious biases when you're doing this kind of thing, and you go, I never knew I had that sort of inclination to think about this word or that word or the other. Because to me, bronze, maybe it's just the mouthfeel of the word, it's got a very rich feel to it, whereas brass, I think, brass bands, I think kind of showy, sort of flashy, hardened in effrontery, like very, I think very Broadway musical when I think brass. And I think Museum of Natural History when I think bronze. But which makes it really fun to think about how we would think about those words differently if from antiquity to now, that age in ancient history was called the Brass Age. Because for centuries, that's what it would have been called. The Romans would have been the first people to develop brass, and they would have ushered in the Brass Age in antiquity and taken over the world because of the strength of their brass.
Yeah. And also how it's fine to have, one word cover a multitude of things, and then it starts getting divided up into smaller groups. Like, that comes up a lot when you're looking at how color names came about.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like to make the not very politically correct statement that women see in 2, 5, 6 colours, whereas men just have the basic 8. If you ask a man to tell the difference between something that is eau de Nil versus I don't know, magnolia, generally speaking in my life, the men go, what now? And you say the pale blue one or the cream one. Oh yeah, okay. So I think I do love the richness of variety in colour words, but I'm aware that not everybody has that variety going on. They think very much in terms of red, blue, green, your basic stuff. That's how it goes.
That's reasonable.
I like to how, you're talking about the kind of connotations of the word brass versus the connotations of the word bronze. And interesting that the word brassy to describe a person takes in that brazen, flashy, kind of loud idea that you have, whether that's crossover from that word or whether it is simply just related to the sound and the feel of the word brass. But wow, the Bronze Age wasn't called the Bronze Age by the people who were bronzing it.
Yeah, it would have been the Brass Age for the hundreds and hundreds of years for the people in England talking about the Romans. So yeah.
That's incredible.
Bronze and brass.
Bronze and brass.
Cool. Very cool.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now I feel like I'm wondering a lot about brass instruments and whether they were bronze instruments. And yeah, I feel like I have to reevaluate my whole relationship with the words brass and bronze.
Yeah. I feel like a bronze trumpet would be much classier, but apparently it would be exactly the same. So
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. From measles to brazen.
Yep.
And now the explanation for my sudden intake of breath when you said that your word was brazen.
Okay.
My word is break.
Oh, nice.
I thought we'd finally reached that point that we've discussed many times, but it's never actually occurred where, completely by accident, we both end up researching the same word.
Yeah. As close as we've come.
So, last week when we were recording, we spoke about the phrase cookery book. Now, Mignon, to fill you in on this, Ryan is endlessly amused by the way that I pronounce the phrase cookery book.
It's fantastic.
It is.
It's a great Scottish expression.
It feels very ordinary to me, but you liked it a lot. And we talked a little bit about what's the most apt phrase to sort of show off an accent, whether it's a Scots accent or any other kind of accent. And after I started to research this word, I thought that this might be a good candidate. It has the combination of the R sound, which often in Scots accents sounds particularly rolling and kind of harsh.
Yeah.
And it has a long vowel sound.
Oh, that's
and of course, vowels are really where accents kind of show up. I think that's where the main differences come. So if the word cookery book amused you, then perhaps the fact that I'm going to say the word break quite a lot of times.
It's pretty fantastic.
It's quite a Scots sounding word when I say it. So here is what I found out about the word break. We'll look at the verb. My goodness, this is the word that keeps on giving. There are so many different usages of the verb. So we go to OED online, and the first definition that's given, quite simply, to sever into distinct parts by sudden application of force or to part by violence, often with an adjunct indicating result, as in to break asunder. Asunder doesn't get nearly as much press as it should, in my opinion.
No.
Asunder's a great word.
Yeah, really good. To break in pieces, to break up into smaller parts. So tons of phrasal verbs going on when you get to break. And the first citation that the OED has is from around about 1000. So in an Old English, pre-Old English Psalm, we have the version of the word that's in the citation here is brixed, B-R-I-C-S-T, which is also, as you come through these very, very early usages of the words, before spelling existed in any meaningful way, you get some really wonderful variants. So we have brixed and brack and broke and breaken and all these different, really, really rich sounding variations. In terms of its etymology, Old English brecan, that's B-R-E-C-A-N, past tense breck, with an A-E hash in the middle, and past participle broken with a C. So many other Germanic languages have this word, or words that sound a lot like this brekan, break sense. And I was delighted to find that it derives from a pie root, because we do love pie. And the Proto-Indo-European root, breg, that's B-H-R-E-G. So when I had a look at breg from Etym Online, which informed me of this Proto-European root, I found something interesting about the word break. I found that it exists from this Proto-Indo-European root, And then the word sound seems to have broken in two. So from our Germanic Old English type languages, we maintain that BR, hard br sound. This leads us to cognates like brash, breeches, brioche, that was an interesting one, break, B-R-A-K-E. But then there are all these other cognates that sound related because they are related, but sound very different. We have words like fraction, fracture, fragment, the wonderful, a word I'd never seen before, naufragus, that's Naufragus.
What does that
which
mean?
It means something that causes a shipwreck.
Oh, it's my favorite of the year so far now.
Delightfully specific.
Delightfully specific, isn't it? Yeah, so I presume you could have a naufragus rock or a naufragus feature of the landscape, I suppose.
Oh, that's amazing.
So I found myself interested in how it is that all these cognates have come from this single breg Proto-Indo-European root. And I found that, quite simply, the root broke, it diverged. We found Latin, frangere, which means to break something in pieces, to shatter. The meaning stays pretty constant. It's just the variations around it that become interesting. And so I started to wonder, is this a common sound change? Because to me, to my ears, br to fr, they're quite divergent, they're quite different. So I did a little bit of digging. I had another look at some other BH pi roots. And I found, for example, bel, B-H-E-L, which is the Proto-Indo-European root meaning to blow or to swell. And lots of its derivatives refer to round objects and to the notion of tumescent masculinity. Watkins. I don't know who Watkins was, but that's an incredibly polite way of talking about this swelling root. And I found that with bell, exactly the same thing has happened as with breck. So we have cognates of bell like ball, balloon, bold, bollocks, always a nice word to discuss,
Right.
bulk, things like that. But we also have, from the same pi root, follicle, folly, full, and phallus. So essentially, I've hit upon a pattern that pi roots may have taken. On the one hand, the Germanic sense keeps the b harsh sound, and the Latin and Italian it seems to split towards that soft F, either PHF sound or just F sound. So
Amazing.
we find ourselves with the fractured etymology of a word that's been around for a very long time that means to break.
That's really interesting.
Neat.
Did you... Because when you first... It's funny, when you first said the word you were looking for, I instantly thought of 3 possible rows we were going to go down.
Okay.
Which was either break, B-R-E-A-K, the verb, break, B-R-E-A-K, the noun, like a rest or a break in the day, or break, B-R-A-K-E,
To stop
the
something.
verb to stop something. But we kind of got there a little bit with, as break, B-R-A-K-E being one of the offshoots, one of the just different sort of spellings, but it's interesting to think of that. But it's also interesting to think of the connection from, it's easier to get from the break as in a break in your work or a break in the day or the break of day to the verb to break something, to divide, because you get that sense of splitting up or
Parts.
dividing or parting something with a break in the middle of it type of thing. So that's that's very cool.
The
And it is
OED
a great word to hear a Scottish person say over and over again.
Oh,
I'm just not even
Indeed.
The OED lists for the verb break 42 separate groups of definitions. And
Good
within
grief.
those, several of those have A, B, C, D, E. There are so many ways to use this word,
Yeah.
which makes sense. You know, almost as soon as something was created, it was broken. At least if there were any toddlers kicking around, I presume that was the case. So, you know, it's such a rich word, and you know, I'm not going to go through all of the all of the different usages, some of the more interesting ones. To break as in to solve a code, to decipher something, first cited in 1928. Some of them that become very sort of specific, breaking one's word, so breaking an oath or breaking a promise, breaking from something.
Yeah.
Which has got a wonderful citation from 1530. I break a young beast from his wild conditions.
Nice.
And to break a horse.
I was just,
or another animal. Yeah. To break a duck in cricket.
Sorry, to what?
To break one's duck. So
D-U-C-K?
Yes. It has the sense. So a duck is, now I am by no means an expert on cricket. We don't care about it in Scotland for all that it's one of England's national sports.
You care about it more than Canada.
I think that a duck is to go up to bat without scoring any runs.
Oh, okay.
So to break a duck is to score your first run in an innings.
Right, okay.
But it also kind of has that sense of...
to snap a losing streak type of thing.
Yeah. To kind of, to get yourself... I was going to say it's almost like the sort of popping a cherry kind of sense of... I was worried that this was never going to happen, but now it has and I can kind of get on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I've also just realised that I completely forgot to mention while you were talking about brass and brazen. This is another one of these, I don't know if this is a Scots phrase or perhaps a usage that is more peculiar to British English, but do you talk in North America about someone having a brass neck? No? So it's very much contains that sort of link between brass and brazen. If someone has a brass neck, then they are a chancer. You know, they'll take and then they'll ask you for a little bit more.
So they'll stick their neck out,
lacking
it's
in
hard as
effrontery.
brass type of thing.
Yeah.
Huh.
That's interesting.
So
no, I've never heard that before.
You might talk about someone as being hard-necked, but also brass-necked.
Huh.
In Scots, we would say brass-necked, which is, quite interesting.
That's really
So that's an insult, right?
Yeah, generally speaking. You might kind of say it sort of half admiring the sheer effrontery of someone. You know, look at the brass neck that they've got. It's almost stunning how how shameless this person is.
Right, okay.
But sorry, back to break. There are two senses of noun also given by the OED.
Okay.
So an act of breaking.
Yeah.
And the break of the day. So the break of morn, break of the day. But yeah, we could keep talking about different definitions. There are so many of them. The OED, in fact, says, let me find where it is. Yes, many of the uses of this verb are so contextual that it is difficult, if not impossible, to find places for them in a general scheme of its signification. When not found here, they may be sought under other words of the phrase.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, it's a word that the OED admits is so well used, it's almost difficult to define.
When it's beyond the scope of the OED to define something, you've hit on a magic treasure.
Right. I'm wondering about breakdancing. Does it say why breakdancing is called breakdancing? I
that
can't
is
reach my
interesting.
computer.
Now, I wonder, I'm imagining that it might have something to do with, the breakdown part of a song.
Okay.
Like break it down. Yeah.
I do not see breakdancing, certainly not as one word. Hold on, I will keep looking.
And again, that's just another example of how crazy specific and how multitudinous the various ways to use this are. So the Edom Online has 1982 as being the origin of the word, but of course the style sort of developed in the Bronx in the 70s coming up as sort of hip hop came up as well. And I guess the idea was, it says the references to the rhythmic break in a pop dance song,
Okay.
which the DJ isolated and the dancers performed to. So they would cut out all the rest of the stuff, just keep the beat. That would be the breakdown, and then that's where they would do the dancing in between the singing and the solos and all the rest of the stuff, I guess.
I
Cool,
love that
so-
we are essentially folk etymologizing a word that is only cited in 1982. That's
Yeah.
great. Let the folk etymology flag continue to fly.
Although it's interesting that it has the breakdown is recorded from
1832.
Well, it says 1864 in the OED, a riotous dance, which is
Oh, I have 1832, the act of breaking and falling down, as in a nervous breakdown.
oh yeah, this is like the musical
Okay.
breakdown. Now the OED in its venerable, and this is the thing where you're running into when you're reading definitions written long, long ago. The actual definition given in the OED for 1864 was a riotous dance in the style of the Negroes.
Oh, I see.
So
Oh
it's
no.
which is but it is interesting that like when people think about breakdancing, and especially in the 80s and even into the 90s when hip hop was still kind of shunted off to the side of music before it had taken over as the new rock stars like they are now. It's interesting that it was like, this isn't a new cultural tie-in to
Right.
sort of black culture in North America. Like it was obviously, there are ties, there are links to be drawn from the early 80s and the 70s in Bronx and other boroughs of New York to hundreds of years before that, 100 and some odd years before that, and probably way back beyond that as well. So like
I
this
think
wasn't
the,
a
I think the
standalone thing.
significant distinction to make between those two definitions is that I think that you're absolutely right. You know, it would be generally considered that breakdancing came out of Black American culture, and you could look at, you know, appropriation of that, and there's a rabbit hole to get down. But that, I think that's something that that the communities in the places that you're talking about, the Bronx, would take ownership of. I think there's something very different between that and having a presumably white historical recording sort of dude talking about the riotous dance of the Negroes.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're right. It's problematic when you're looking at historical citation. But you know, as we've discussed before, history isn't always pretty, but it was certainly there, and so we look at it. We look at it anyway, and we consider what the implications of that are now.
Yeah. And I have officially reached the end of my comfort level in discussing the historical links of breakdancing and black culture as a middle-class white dude from Canada. So I'm going to go, and at some point this week, I'm going to try to find a breakdancing podcast and just ask them.
Ryan has
What do
been
you think
broken by
about this?
breakdancing.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, the Brazen Measles break is also
Brazen Measles break. That's
great,
amazing.
these episode titles write themselves. It's fantastic. Mignon, thank you so much for coming along and joining us and bringing your measles
Oh.
with you.
Will
You
we
got
have Hey Roger? What do you say?
Oh
What's
yeah,
that?
do you have, if you've got those? So we do. We've sort of, it's been more intermittent now than it was when we started, and often we will do a section we like to call Hey Roger, what do you say, where we delve into the thesaurus to explore just how misguided thesauruses can be. And sort of we look up a word and we will see how far wrong you could get. Amy and I both taught English in Korea for a couple years. It doesn't matter how many years ago now.
Oh, quite a few years ago.
And there's nothing like communicating in a foreign language and trying to help people whose native tongue is not English speak English to really learn how far astray you can get with a phrase book or a thesaurus. Words that are labeled synonyms sometimes just aren't.
Yeah.
And so that's where this segment came in. So every now and then it's fun just to dive in and see how far away from the real definition you can get by using the suggestions of Roger.
Okay, so Roger has this to say about measles. We have a single synonym, infection. Underneath that we have measly, unimportant, or simply bad. And that, I think, is worth looking a little bit closer at. Bad being a word that must have almost as many synonyms as break has different contextual meanings. So, in infections... Oh my goodness. so many wonderful words for diseases. Montezuma's Revenge, I think, has got to stick out there.
Well, yeah.
So in this particular section, 651, ill health or disease, we start off with sort of descriptions of general health, so delicacy or a weak constitution. We go from there into weakness, seediness, loss of condition, neurosis, all the way through into symptoms, and then you find medical, biological titles of diseases. But thrown in with that, you also get such wonders as insalubrity.
That's fantastic. That's pretty great.
Just a few lines down from lentivirus, we find insalubrity. And it goes on to prickly heat, ulceration, osteoarthritis. Measles is in here somewhere.
There's a lot of really fun words for terrible things in the medical field. True.
I draw your attention to cankerous.
Yep.
Or cankered. Yeah. Fab. In terms of measly, oh dear, have I lost my place? That would be pretty typical of having to use a real life book with pages in it. Yeah, so if we look simply at bad under measly, it's actually not as big a section as I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, I would expect that to be huge.
Yeah, there are some good bad words. Oh, canker turns up here again. So we get from bad qualities and beastliness through into, oh, wonderful, peccancy.
Peccancy?
As in a peccadillo or peccatorious.
Okay, yeah.
Malevolence and misfortune to hoodoos and jinxes.
And malevolence has that smell.
Malevolent, yeah. I remember that when it means bad wishes.
Yes, fab. Malediction, saying a bad thing. And then we get into measly, second rate, low grade, not good enough, faulty. And that takes us to one of my most favourite Scots words, manky, which is dirty or unclean. Fetid, disease, scandalous, melancholy. I do love the fact that once upon a time melancholy was a disease rather than an
actual disease, yeah.
Someone being a little bit sad. We have damned, darned, blasted and dratted all in the same category. Yeah, taking us quite far away from measly, certainly in the sense that having little spots might make you feel bad and thus perhaps behave in a way that's not all that fun for the people around about you.
Oh.
Okay, how about brazen?
Brazen, I think, would be interesting. It's interesting how the words do cross over. Like, you got cankerous in both the bad and the disease sections.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, back when words were being invented, she says, as if that doesn't happen every single day, getting sick often meant getting dead.
Well, that's
so
true.
I think I get that.
True.
Okay, brazen has a few more synonyms than I was expecting, but they all relate to that sense of a lack of effrontery. So we have strident, undisguised, proud, insolent, wicked, impenitent and impious, to brazen it out, so to be obstinate or to be insolent.
Okay, yeah, so they're all taking that.
Yeah. Interestingly, brass, we have a mixture, blowing, resonance, strider, orchestra, horn, and then we get the sense of yellowness, monument, which, now how far away can you get from a trumpet to a monument? Director, as in the brass, the upper
top brass
echelons, a badge of rank, shekels, a word which we discussed last time also, that's interesting. Yeah. Wealth, and the last one given for brass, sauciness.
Sauciness seems like the most perfect one. As someone who's very brassy would be very saucy.
Now, when we get to break, oh my goodness, there are hundreds here. We have 2 and a bit columns of break synonyms. Interestingly, breakdancing is listed by Roger shortly afterwards, and the synonyms given are dancing, but also agitation.
There you go.
I'll see you at the agitation competition.
That's definitely how you go wrong.
Yeah.
Yes, well, thanks, Roger.
So we have a load of breaks. I would heartily recommend it if you happen to be interested in such things. Take a look at some of the various uses of break. There's just so many.
Yeah.
To break bulk, to break your fall, to break someone on the wheel, as in to break them through torture. Break a leg, the sense of
do good work and don't break your legs.
Break trade, and it breaks no square. A rather interesting one.
That's an interesting phrase. It's fitting that the word break, there's sort of an autological element to that as well, in the fact that it has broken so many times into various splintery definitions and usages.
Yeah.
Which is fun.
Cool.
Very neat.
Words great.
Words are great. Love these things. So once again, thank you so much, Mignon, for taking the time. I know you're super busy and just came back from a bunch of travels, but it was awesome to get to speak to you again and chat words.
Yeah, thank you. I love talking about and learning about word origins, so this was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Yeah, and awesome. You're more than welcome anytime you feel like coordinating 3 time zones is something you get involved with to come back and say hello again.
For sure.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for giving us the measles.
Words that may have never been spoken before.
That's it for another episode of Lexitecture. If you like what you've heard, please spread the words. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook by searching Lexitecture, Lexitecture, and find us on our website at lexitecture.com. We also love hearing from you, so if you've got a word you'd like us to look into, a tasty bit of trivia to share, or anything else you'd like to tell us, drop us a line at words@lexitecture.com. Talk to you next time. Bye.